I love it when people say carbon dating. I say, well, in actual fact, carbon dating gives good evidence for a young Earth.
Since the invention of radiocarbon dating in the early 50s, history and archaeology have undergone major paradigm shifts that changed everything we thought we knew about humanity's past.
So the pyramids are crazy, right? We all know this. But did you know, the actual facts about them? You know that the pyramids line up perfectly with the Orion's belt.
Today, Elon Musk believes we are on the brink of another major shift, this time focused on the mysterious pyramids of Egypt. He believes they stretch far beyond the prehistoric era to a time long before the Pharaohs. Were these pyramids truly the work of ancient rulers, or were they the legacy of a long-forgotten civilization? Join us as we examine the people, records, and problems behind Egypt's pyramids. Gaps and anomalies in the common narrative. As recommended by the scientific method, we begin by examining the how before the who. The main narrative for over a century has been that the pyramids were built over 4,000 years ago during the 4th dynasty of ancient Egypt. This has been the leading view for most scholars, believing that the Great Pyramids of Khufu, Khafra, and Menkaure were built by tens of thousands of workers. They claim these workers worked with nothing but copper chisels, wooden sledges, and massive ramps to move and shape the large limestone blocks. This makes the ancient pyramids an ancient marvel of remarkable human achievement, except that it has many problems that still haven't been addressed. Behind this widely accepted explanation lies a myriad of problems and anomalies that still don't make any sense to modern historians. Let's start with the biggest issue: precision and framework. As we know, the pyramids and surrounding structures are made up of granite rocks weighing up to 80 tons. Despite this, we know that each of these massive blocks is cut and placed with great accuracy, and it gets even more absurd when we examine the main ingredient of these naturally made stones: granite. This material is known as one of the hardest stones on Earth, and the mere thought that weaker copper tools were used to shape the much larger and stronger granite rocks is questionable at best. So how have historians addressed this problem? This is where it gets interesting. Mainstream archaeologists suggest that these massive stones were weakened over time by sand abrasion and dolerite pounders. Sand abrasion is a stone working technique where sand is used as an abrasive agent to grind and cut through much harder stone. The argument is that workers in ancient Egypt could have used the sand to do the cutting, while the copper tools were only used to hold the sand in place. Modern Egyptologists believe that sand abrasion was used to saw and drill granite stones over 4,000 years ago, and they use that to explain how the stones were carved and placed into the pyramids we see in Egypt today. But there are huge problems with this theory. For one, sand abrasion is a very slow process, and the math behind it makes the conclusion even more absurd. Secondly, sand abrasion alone can't account for the digging, moving, and lifting of the stones. The best estimate we can give still falls short. For example, the Great Pyramid has about 2.6 million blocks of stone, and assuming each sand abrasion operation goes 100% smoothly, shaping each block would take about 20 hours with 5 hours per meter cubed. With this estimate, historians argue that if 20,000 people worked for 10 hours a day with little to no rest or pauses, they could do about 60 million hours a year and complete the process in 10 months. On this surface, this seems to explain everything, making the process sound easy and efficient. But as usual, there are a lot of problems with this theory. For one, workers back then weren't working shifts as effectively as we do today, and even if they were, working for several months at a time wasn't possible due to yearly floods and farming seasons. Simply put, the math required for this to work is too tight for the mainstream story to be plausible. Now let's examine the second explanation, the dolerite pounder. As we know, dolerite, also popularly known today as diabase, is a very hard, igneous rock. It is harder than granite, and dolerite pounders are handheld stones that are used to chip away at granite. This sounds convincing on the surface because modern archaeologists have found thousands of dolerite balls at the Aswan quarries that were shaped for this same purpose. The problem with using this technique as an explanation is that pounding out granite from solid bedrock with dolerite could take weeks and even months to finish. For this reason alone, some engineers believe that the scale of the pyramid project would have required more efficient methods than pounding thousands of blocks by hand. As we've seen, sand abrasion and dolerite pounders simply don't hold up to explaining what we see today. These old techniques are simply not enough to reach the level of craftsmanship required to pull this off. In fact, many scientists and historians are open to the possibility that the skill required to build the pyramids might be far above and beyond the capabilities of Bronze Age technology. Even the unfinished sarcophagus in the Cairo Museum that shows signs of copper saws and abrasive sand also shows the heavy limitations of these tools for the time. Logistical problems in the common narrative. As we've pointed out, scaling up these limited tools to a monumental level required for the massive pyramids is quite impossible, so let's go beyond the tools to the logistics. Taking the Pyramid of Khufu, for example, it's believed that this monument was built in 23 years with about 25,000 workers. However, old scholar Stuart Austin Weir strongly disagreed with this. He wrote about his theory and published it as part of the 1996 Cambridge Archaeological Journal. This old Cambridge study shows that to complete the pyramid in 23 years, the workers would need to install over 300 cubic meters of stone each day. Considering how the working surface area shrinks as the pyramid rises, it is plausible that, at around 130 meters, the space needed for moving and placing stones would have become so limited that the required manpower and materials would become nearly impossible to manage. This bottleneck makes many historians doubtful about whether the construction would have been achieved using only the tools and techniques that are pushed forward by the mainstream narrative. Also confusing is how the Great Pyramid is aligned to true north. As we know, the Great Pyramid is oriented with an error margin of just 3/60ths of a degree, an error so slim that it rivals those of our best equipment that are easily available today. Mainstream scholars explain by citing the use of plumb bobs and sighting rods. Plumb bobs were pointed weights that were used to measure vertical accuracy, while sighting rods were special tools marked with notches that were used for horizontal and directional accuracy. These were the tools ancient people relied on long before lasers and GPS protocols existed. However, these ancient tools don't work well enough to produce the level of accuracy that is shown by the Great Pyramids. For perspective, the ancient alignment from over 4,000 years ago is more accurate than that of the Royal Observatory in Greenwich, built thousands of years later with much better equipment. This has led scientists like Robert Bauval to propose a new pattern of thought known as the Orion correlation theory. This suggests that the pyramids were laid out to mirror the belt of Orion, but as exciting as this was, it was dismissed for lack of textual evidence. It was also dismissed due to how other pyramids are aligned in similar ways that have nothing to do with Egyptian mythology, such as the Chinese mausoleum of the first Qin emperor and the Mesoamerican pyramid of the sun. But then comes a much bigger anomaly that brings everything into question. This is the weathering evidence found in the Great Sphinx and its enclosure that is believed to have been built sometime around 2500 BC. Built by Pharaoh Khafre, the Sphinx shows shocking erosional patterns that geologists believe are more consistent with rainfall rather than wind or sand. This was pointed out by famous geologist Robert Schoch and alternative Egyptologist Anthony West, and they claimed that the rounded edges and deep fissures of the Sphinx show that the structure has been exposed to very long seasons of devastating rainfall. The ramifications of this discovery were unbelievable. This is because various geochronologists believe Egypt has not experienced that kind of rainfall since the end of the last ice age around 7000 BC. But if Robert Schoch and Anthony West are correct about this, then it means the Sphinx is much older than the other Egyptian pyramids by at least 3,000 years. This implies that the Sphinx was built by a much older civilization sometime during the end of the Holocene epoch, right after the Pleistocene Ice Age. Those against this discovery claim that the erosion was caused by the Nile flooding. This occurred about once a year, when the river would overflow from its banks due to water coming in from different directions. At best times, it would transport nutrients to farmland and bring prosperity, and at worst times, water levels would rise to almost 10 meters, easily eroding farms, destroying homes and drowning livestock. But Robert Schoch disagrees with this. He claims that the upper part of the Sphinx isn't expected to be covered or eroded by floodwaters, as no evidence of overflowing water from the Nile could ever rise up to that point. Also, even if it did, the upper parts are supposed to be the least affected. But as we know, it is the upper part that is most damaged, almost like it got affected first. This implies that rainfall is a much better explanation than flooding or quarrying. All this shows is that while the mainstream narrative is widely supported by a vast majority of scholars, it leaves a myriad of questions that haven't been addressed for centuries, even to this day. With that settled, what alternative theories are out there that can give a better explanation of how the pyramids were built? And how does it change our conclusion on the real builders of the pyramids? Stay with us as we carefully unravel the answers and much more. Who really built the pyramids? Now that we've addressed the how, let's now address the who behind the pyramids. As we know, the scholarly consensus tells us that the story of Egypt's pyramids starts with Pharaoh Djoser, the visionary leader of the Third Dynasty who started the very first pyramid. This was a stepped structure rising from the sands of Saqqara, measured ahead of time, and designed by his lead architect Imhotep. It is believed that Snefru, the founder of the Fourth Dynasty, pushed the limits by commissioning two pyramids at Dahshur. One was the bent pyramid that had, and the other was the red pyramid, also known as Egypt's first smooth-sided pyramid. As great as they are today, these were only proven experiments that paved the way for the famous Pyramid of Giza. This was supervised by Snefru's son, Khufu, and he built this in 2560 BC. Khafra, his successor, built his own pyramid along with the Sphinx. The last of the three was built by Menkaure. His pyramid was smaller and was used to complement the Giza complex. But with all the data we have today, the origins of the pyramids go beyond workers and pharaohs. Now it's about whether or not the pyramids came from a much older civilization that is more advanced than we've always thought. If that is buried, then history isn't a straight line of progress in technology and innovation. Rather, it's a sad tale of lost knowledge and forgotten achievements. Today, they are seen as much more than royal tombs built by workers, but as keys to a forgotten past that is much smarter and skilled than we realized. This is why many people, including Elon Musk, believe there is a much deeper story behind who really built the pyramids and what kind of world made them possible to construct. So who really built the pyramids? Elon believes the evidence points to a Nile Valley civilization that built Nabta Playa. This megalithic site was built to align with the solstice and the known movement of stars, dating back to 6000 BC. He claims these people had the astronomical knowledge and skills required to build these massive structures. By the time of the Fourth Dynasty, they were wiped out by the quick rise of the pharaohs. If this is true, then Khufu's construction of the great building might have been a rebuilding and rebranding project and not started from scratch. Elon implies that the dynastic Egyptians inherited a half-completed or weathered monument from an older civilization and claimed it as their own for the sake of honor and divinity, just as Anthony West and Robert Schoch had proposed years earlier. This explains the inconsistencies in the marks, evidence found for advanced techniques in some places, while others show primitive methods of building. With this in mind, Elon believes the true knowledge of the pyramids has been lost in history, not because the records are wrong on purpose, but rather because something tragic like this has happened before. The Great Library of Alexandria. In 331 BC, Alexander the Great, a young conqueror who took over most of the known world, founded a large and beautiful city in northern Egypt called Alexandria. Over 40 years after he died in 285 BC, the people in this city started worshipping the Muses, known to many back then as the 9 beautiful goddesses of the arts. To honor these goddesses, the richest scholars in the city built a large learning institution in Alexandria. This ancient school grew so famous that the Einsteins and Newtons of those days traveled from all over the world to study in this institution. There, they wrote all they learned about the natural world in sacred scrolls made of papyrus. From the advanced architecture of the ancient pyramids to entire courses in basic arithmetic and advanced lessons in herbal medicine, this ancient institution had it all. The scrolls they collected became so many that the scholars needed to build a special library to keep them safe. Under the strict orders of King Ptolemy II, hundreds of workers began to build the library for these scrolls. But unlike what the scholars had in mind, King Ptolemy wanted the library to collect and store all the knowledge in the world. He wanted Alexandria to become the largest hub of learning and culture in the ancient world. To make this happen, he sent agents to buy the most sacred books from all over the globe. This effort was a huge success.
There have been collections of texts and books in other ancient cities, but the ambition of the library here was quite extraordinary. Alexandria wanted to be the repository of all knowledge on Earth.
And among the scrolls the agents brought back were the earliest and most accurate copies of Homer's Greek mythology, the ancient mathematics of Pythagoras, the medical courses of Hippocrates, and the oldest Greek copies of the Old Testament. At times, the scholars and scribes got so greedy that they would often borrow books from visitors, copy them, keep the originals, and return the copies. And in less than a century, the library's collection grew from less than 100 writings to over 100,000 scrolls. Among the brilliant scholars the library copied from was Eratosthenes, the Greek mathematician who calculated the Earth's circumference on his own, and Aristarchus of Samos, the first person who suggested our planet was a round body that orbits the sun. Both writers compiled their work in the scrolls stored in this library, and they were written long before 200 BC. Through this library, the ancients had a deep understanding of medicine, and they were so good at performing surgeries and developing herbal solutions to the worst medical issues. So much so that several sick people with incurable illnesses borrowed lots of money to afford traveling to Alexandria so they could get cured. By that time, the astronomers had already mapped out the stars and created accurate calendars that come close to what we all use today. It was a great time in history to be a scholar, but sadly, there was trouble on the horizon. The problems began in 48 BC during a war in Alexandria. Julius Caesar ordered his soldiers to destroy the ships at the harbor with fire. This fire quickly got out of hand and destroyed a huge chunk of the library's collection. Things got worse later on in 275 AD, when the city was invaded by multiple enemies and was set on fire on more than one occasion. The final nail in the coffin was set in 391 AD, when Bishop Theophilus of Alexandria ordered his priests to destroy the final temple that hid most of the scrolls that were once stored in the library. That was how all the scrolls got destroyed, and thanks to how greedy the ancient scribes were, they did their best not to copy the scrolls in their collection to keep them in other places. They wanted the great library of Alexandria to be the only place where the information was kept. So when it got destroyed, there was no way to recover the information, as most of the writers were long gone. What made it so painful was that the details of how the pyramids were built were recorded in this library. Aside from that, countless original autographs of literature, science, and history got lost forever. Thanks to this, much of the knowledge about ancient times and civilizations will always remain a mystery. It was a huge blow to the scholars of the ancient world, and humanity never recovered from it until the scientific revolution of the 16th century. That was when we began to rediscover most of what was lost in the ancient library. Our basic knowledge of algebra, the Earth's circumference, steam power, human anatomy, and advanced medicine had to be rediscovered by later geniuses like Isaac Newton and Albert Einstein. Other things, like how the pyramids were built and how his early water-powered robotics worked back then, are still a mystery, and Elon believes understanding this is a first step to understanding the lost knowledge of the pyramids. So, what do you think? Is Elon's proposal a better alternative to the common narrative, or is he just wrong about the whole thing? Let us know in the comments down below. If you enjoyed the video, please make sure you like, share, and subscribe. Also, click on the next video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.